Thank you very much for having me to present the findings of this report released a few months ago. So we'll just share the presentation. Can everyone see my screen? I think it works. So yeah, just to introduce myself, I'm Vincent. I'm part of the demand sector unit inside the WIO team at the International Energy Agency, and I worked for the report on the data center energy demand modeling. And so in this presentation, I will present some of the key findings of this report, essentially on the demand aspect, but also on the other side of the coin with what kind of AI application, what is the potential of AI application for energy. So yeah, I will start with this slide, which shows, actually we are talking about artificial intelligence, but this artificial intelligence has a physical body, which is actually the data centers. So this physical infrastructure is what is the concrete side of AI. And this physical infrastructure has some very specific feature in terms of when we compare it to different energy infrastructure, other energy assets. And one of the first is the fact that it's concentrated near urban areas. So this leads to some challenges, of course, because of the big load it's adding to the grid, but there is also some potential linked to the fact that it's close to urban areas. For example, in terms of future heat reuse, it's something which can help to tap this potential. But not only these data centers are close to urban areas, but they have also a very high spatial concentration, which means that they are close to the same urban areas first, and around these urban areas, they are in the same areas, which means that not only one single data center represents a big load for the grid, but since they cluster, one data center will not be alone, and you have a group of data center which will represent an even bigger challenge for the grid to ensure the smooth integration of this infrastructure into the energy system. So I will now talk a bit more about data center. I'm sorry for this the fact that I'm linking because of this power outage Brenton was mentioning, but I will talk about the electricity demand, the global electricity demand of this data center and what we've observed in the last decade. So from roughly 2007 and 2015, we had kind of a plateau due to big energy efficiency improvement, a shift from small infrastructure to bigger and more efficient infrastructure, and also all of this infrastructure becoming more efficient. The hardware, the software also becoming more efficient, being able to deal with more IT service demand with less energy. So all of these efficiency measures were implementing, they were offsetting the growth of the IT service demand during one decade. But in 2015, these compensation of the growth by the efficiency gains slow down, and we've seen a new acceleration of this demand, and this also is the time where we saw the first AI optimized server, what we call the accelerated servers. So in 2015, 2016, we saw the first one coming online, and when we look at the outlook, we see that this growth will continue will continue, and we'll see also that the accelerated server will play a bigger role, because today they still represent a small share of the electricity demand, but they will represent 70% of the growth in our base case, which means that even if the conventional server are still growing, the key driver of the electricity demand growth from the data center will be these AI optimized servers. Of course, the data center will not be the only driver of electricity demand. And here we see that data center will contribute as much as heating, so water and space heating, to the global electricity demand. But this figure also really depends on the region. For example, in the US, where the global electricity demand is not growing that much, data center will play a very more significant role and represent between 40 and 50% of the electricity demand growth by the end of the decade, while in other regions like Southeast Asia, for example, where other key drivers of the electricity demand are playing a big role in the growth, data center will represent just a few percent of this growth. And around at the global level, data center represent less than 10% of the electricity demand growth, with other key driver being essentially industry, space cooling, and what we see on the chart on the right. Now I wanted also to emphasize the fact that this outlook is marked with a lot of uncertainties, essentially because of the uncertainty around the adoption of some AI technologies, but also the fact that this industry has very little inertia and can, like the project pipeline does not allow to project really beyond a few years because the construction time of this infrastructure is very short. And so to handle this uncertainty, we designed four sensitivity cases, and here you see the range of sensitivity cases. So the range goes from 700 terawatt hour in 2035 to 1,700 for the lift-off case, was what we call the lift-off case, where we estimate where we model with less local constraint, less local position, easier access to the electricity, no constraint on accessing power for data centers. And in the what we call the headwind case, there is more constraint on building this infrastructure at the local level, and so we have a slowdown of the growth. But we see you can see the size of this range. But I want also to just show one specific case, which I think is very interesting for us, is what we call the high efficiency case. Basically, it starts with the same kind of assumption regarding the regulation and regarding the service demand, the drivers, and the adoption of AI. But we just assume that best practices are implemented and efficiency measures are implemented. And this leads to more than 15% of saving by 2035. So these efficiency measures can be grouped in three big groups. The infrastructure first, that PUEs basically. The hardware, which means that with the same service demand, you need less energy because the hardware becomes more efficient. And the software, which means that you're designing your software in a way which is more efficient. And it's not necessarily bigger AI, but smarter AI, for example, when we talk about AI. The other side of the coin of this electricity demand, of course, is the generation. And renewables will be the key source to meet this demand, and more than 50% of the growth will be made by renewables. But of course, natural gas will also play a key role, essentially because it has also very short construction time. And from 2030, we will see the introduction of small modular reactors for nuclear, which will start to play also a role to meet this demand in a clean way. But of course, this mix will really depends on the region due to several factors, but essentially because of the existing mix. So what is easier to scale up, and also the policy setting, what kind of incentives exist to develop this or this source, and also the size of the growth in the different regions. On this aspect of power generation, it's interesting to talk a bit about the strategy to meet in a clean way this growing demand and the strategies adopted by the companies. And what we did for analysis is to compare the conventional agreements we've seen for meeting this demand, which is usually annual match, which means that you engage with a provider which will provide an amount of energy and ensure that this energy is coming from a clean source, but there is no simultaneity of the demand and the production. And this is what we had on this green this middle column the annual match. And when we introduce this notion of hourly matching, this simultaneity, we have these two other kind of mix and these two other prices. And what is interesting is that with an annual match, we have, for example, with solar PV, between 35 and 45% of hourly matching. But when we increase, and the rest is basically relying on the grid for the physical supply of electricity. But when we increase this share, we still have some competitive prices. And with a significant share of hourly matching, we still have competitive prices with annual match. So there are ways to make this procurement of energy more efficient for the grid, which are still economically interesting for the companies and which are not necessarily implying a big premium from them. Now to talk about the last aspect of all of this data center energy demand we explored in this modeling. There is the question from the query side: how much energy is consumed when we look at the query level. So we did the comparison between different model for the same task and different tasks. So basically, one of the key takeaway from this is that for the same task, you can have very different energy demand depending on the size of the model you're using. So this is where, so for example, here for text generation with a big large language model, you can have the consumption as a LED bulb for 1 hour. So it's around 5 watt hour. But when you look at some other kind of task, for example, video generation, here it's a very simple video generation with a few frames per second, but it's already consuming several order of magnitudes more than, I mean, 2 order of magnitudes more than the text generation. The first aspect is to emphasize the fact that smarter AI can really reduce the energy cost. If we design the model for the task we want, we can really reduce the energy cost. And the second aspect is showing that the way we are designing we are implementing these tasks is also important regarding the energy demand. And of course, trying to be efficient in the way the model is replying to our queries is a key driver of the energy demand. This video generation is consuming roughly as much as 2 laptop charging. And one last aspect I wanted to mention regarding this is that all of these numbers are under experimental conditions, which means that we were not able to implement what is likely implemented in real life, in real world, like some efficiency measures regarding like batching, for example. And with these measures, we estimated that roughly half of the energy demand can be saved. And so you still have these relative relations or the relations between the different tasks. But in real life, there is already some efficiency measures which are put in place to reduce this demand. Now, if we look at the emission aspect, here we will talk about the potential of AI applications for energy and how these emissions can compare with the direct footprint of AI. So if we look at the emissions from electricity consumption from data centers in 2035, we have roughly 500 megatons. And when we look at the potential, so this is something which is way less tangible. It's more, it's really a potential. It's just to say that there is a huge potential, and the potential is too big to be ignored. And so this AI-enabled reductions, the scope is power generation, industry, buildings, several energy sectors. And when we add up all of this reduction we can have, we see that the potential is really significant. And so we cannot prevent to explore this potential based on the fact that there is direct emissions, because we see that the potential is too significant to be ignored. But of course, there is a risk by exploring this potential, and this risk is the rebound effect, the fact that we will incentivize the use of some applications, for example, transport with autonomous cars. We can expect some rebound effect in this area, which will increase the emissions of the transport sector. But still, there is this quantification of what potential AI could have, and the potential is very significant. Thank you for listening, and yeah.
Thank you very much, Vincent. That is certainly interesting. There's so much content there, and it really lays out the uncertainty that lies before us. Looking at the kind of the takeoff case where AI just skyrockets, but also showing that there is possibility of, I suppose, mitigating some of those increases by focusing on efficiency, and looking at how that could have such a great effect in such a short amount of time, looking forward to the next 10 years or so. So just a quick recap then for those who've joined us a few minutes after we started. And again, apologies at the start. We had some issues due to power outage here in Paris, but nevertheless, the show goes on. We've just heard from our IEA colleague, Vincent Jacquemont, about the potential growth trajectories of digital demand from data centers, from AI, and from other platforms. So up next, then we'll move to the next part of the session today, when we look at some of the outputs from our dear colleagues over at the 4ETCP. That is the Energy Efficient End Use Equipment Technology Collaboration Program, which has been a long relationship of that partnership here at the IEA. And so after we hear from updates from the Secretariat, from the TCP Program Manager, Kevin Lane, we'll then move to the next session where we'll hear on the report on data center energy, the critical review, and then with participation from George Camilla and Vlad Carioma. And then after that, we'll move then to the update on the new total energy modeling for data centers from Anson Wu and Fiona Brocklehurst. So with that, I'll stop here and I'll hand the floor over to dear colleague Kevin Lane. Kevin, the floor is yours. If you could just unmute there, Kevin.
What about now?
Perfect. And we can see your slides as well. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you very much, Brendan. And also thank you for putting together this series with us with the 4E Technology Collaboration Program, and also with SEED, the Super Efficient Appliance Deployment Initiative, which is hosted within the IEA as well. So as you said, I'm the program manager of the 4E TCP. These technology collaboration programs, there's about 38 of them within the IEA, or links with the IEA. They're mainly focused on technology, as the name implies. However, the 4E one is more unique in some ways, that it tends to focus more on policy and what governments can do to try and understand how energy is used, and then also what regulations or policy options they have in terms of reducing consumption or making them a higher quality. So the 4ETCP is represented by 15 governments who are also members of the IEA and the OECD. As these 15 governments, our delegates are within the government, and they're also the ones that are mainly responsible for regulating end use equipment policies, so such as the eco design in Europe, or energy conservation standards in the US, or energy labeling. So those sorts of policies, and these are our representatives or our delegates. I should also note that these TCPs, although they associated with the IEA, and we have a mandate from the IEA to run these every few years, it's legally and functionally an autonomous organization that's funded by the members. In terms of 4E, these are our 15 governments that are current members of the TCP. They pretty much represent the countries that have got the most advanced or the most sophisticated end-use product policy regulations and in place. So delighted to have these governments that are able to talk to each other and understand what policies are in there. It's managed by an executive committee, which is of the 15 governments, which steer the work that happens. Our latest mandate, which was from 2024, runs for 5 years, and strategically, the items of work that we're looking at are around demand flexibility of appliances and equipment. It's a bit like Van Sant was hinting at for data centers to try and make their demand a little bit more flexible to match intermittent supply. We're also looking at energy systems, so how products within systems can be better used, and then also some emerging technology, some cross-cutting topics. Within the 4E, we have a set of projects that are going along, which are managed by the executive committee. However, we have 4 platforms, and these are very detailed in what they do, and they almost run by themselves. I'll quickly run through them. The first one's something called EMSA, the Electronic Motor Systems. Around half the world's electricity is used by motors, so this is an important platform to understand how motor systems can be improved. Second one's on solid state lighting and controls, how we can improve the quality and reduce energy consumption of those. EDNA, I'll tell you a bit more about. And then the final one is on power electronic conversion technology. So each of those, we have a lot of information on those. So EDNA, this was the Electronic Devices Network, ANNEX. It's now been relabeled in this new term as the Efficient Demand Flexible Network Appliance Platform. And this is looking at connected devices mainly, but a very large overlap with the topic we're looking at today. So the main topics we are mainly looking at just what are the benefits of digitalization, demand flexibility, and these connected devices versus what are the costs of these, both in terms mainly around the energy consumption of the equipment within the systems, but also upstream as well, so the data centers and other related energy consumption. So in brief, I'll just mention 2 of the main work streams that we have. So EDNA is doing a lot of work, so it's a very rich stream at the moment of work that's going on. So in terms of demand flexibility, this is very important in terms of our future energy systems. So we have a whole series of reports that have come out in the last few months around just what to say, the demand flexibility protocols that need to be in place, home energy storage systems, cybersecurity, just what's the energy consumption of these. So we'll look at a little bit, say the total energy model in a moment. And then in terms of today's work, looking at data streams specifically, there's 2 pieces of work that will follow. So Vlad and Anson will give an update on these 2 reports that have been released in the last couple of months. One is just a critical review of all the energy models on energy consumption of data centers and wider, and then another bigger one looking at all energy consumption upstream. So these 2 pieces of work will follow. If you'd like more information, please do go to our website. All these reports are freely available, so they're downloadable. Just sign in to get a copy of those. If you have any questions on this, please do contact Steve Belitik. He's the program manager for the EDNA platform, or please do get in touch with me. I'd be delighted to talk through anything more about 4E and some of the work that it does. So at this stage, should I hand back to you, Brendan?
Yeah,
introduce
sure.
Vlad. Okay, I'll hand back to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kevin. So now we'll move to the next intervention from colleagues who've worked on the data center energy critical review output. And we'll hear from Vlad from the Rogan Center for Sustainability. Please, Vlad, the floor is yours.
Lovely. Thank you so much for the introduction, Kevin, also for setting the stage, and Brendan for organizing it. So what George and I set out to do was to perform a review of existing models and results of global data center energy use. And they started from observing that there are really very large variations in the published estimates that exist out there, and I will present them shortly. And whilst there were a couple of existing reviews, none of them was comprehensive, like really looking at everything, so, and neither really critical. So most of the reviews existing were picking, like these 3 out of dozens existing estimates and presenting them and presenting sort of their spread without really taking a stance saying, okay, we believe that this is the more correct one because ABC. So that's what we set out to do, and to analyze also the heterogeneity that exists out there in the estimates in terms of methods of data sources of system boundaries. So really, they're very heterogeneous. And this, of course, when you have results that differ by 1 to 2 order of magnitude, this is, of course, very detrimental to thoughtful policy making, because it's a huge difference if something, is 1% of humankind's GHGs or 10%, of course, right? And it also frustrates public understanding. So our objective was thus to produce such a comprehensive and critical review of the existing model, and we set ourselves 3 research questions. How previous studies have estimated the data center energy use, and which are the factors that contributed to these wide-ranging estimates? What is, in our opinion, the most plausible range for data center energy today? And what are the best practices to be followed to do such assessment, and which pitfalls should be avoided? And I'll present all 3 of them, but to different levels of detail. And now is the boring part. I have 3 slides that are the boring part of my presentation. Then we get to the numbers. So sorry for that, but I think it is interesting to see how this evolves. So there is some meta literature that looks at how others have estimated. And usually this literature classifies 3 types of modeling approaches. One is called bottom-up. And this bottom-up means it's bottom-up because it starts from the device level. It looks at which servers are the typical ones in data centers, and hence bottom-up, and it multiplies this with installed server base for a company or for a nation or globally, right? Which is from national statistics, sales statistics, and so on. And you see there is also it's actually a combination of bottom-up sort of server device level data and some top-down data on sales and so on. And then the second one, it's what the literature typically calls top-down, which is to not start from the server level, but to look at company data or national data and aggregate those, and hence the name top-down. And thirdly, there is something that sets a bit aside of this. It's on a different, on sort of orthogonal level, because it goes to the future, and it does this by extrapolation. And very often what this literature does is it takes proxies that, for example, data traffic has been something that has been very used. So projected growth of data traffic and extrapolation of data center energy use, not of network energy use, but of data center energy use as a function of this growing traffic. And this is quite a poor proxy, actually, not much related with the consumption in data centers. So these 3 names are used in the literature. We suggest a change of names, because I said in this second category, we have these totals that get aggregated. We think something like aggregated totals would be the better name for several reasons. So first, it fits. It is an aggregation: data centers to companies, companies to countries, countries to global. But then there is also a different semantic. Top-down in energy modeling, and this the colleagues from IEA will know very well, means actually something like what is the extrapolation down here. So in energy modeling, top-down is we take some microeconomic factors such as economic growth, and then we use that to project, the expected growth. So it's not the term how it is being used here. And then there is also a real top-down methodologies such as economic input-output analysis and environmentally enhanced IO analysis, or something such as qualitative system dynamics, QSD. And for example, Remy Pacou from Schneider Electric made a very nice study. They brought it out last December on quantitative system dynamics to project AI energy growth. And these are true top-down methods. So for all these reasons, we argue that this should be called aggregated totals. And also extrapolation should be mentioned that it is a temporal extrapolation, because there is also, of course, a geographic extrapolation from one country to a continent, from a continent to the world, and so on. And then we suggest there are other, and this is the last boring slide, that there are other methods that get deployed. Hybrid, of course, anything can be hybrid, and very often they are, but very often what we call hybrid is a combination of bottom-up and aggregated totals. Then, as just said, geographic extrapolation is very often deployed, and it should be explicitly called as such and differentiated from temporal. And then other, and here I think we think especially of the true top-down methods, such as quantitative system dynamics, input-output analysis, and so on. And yeah, I forgot to mention this. I jumped over this, sorry. We looked at over 100 articles for this work that have around 200 scenarios, because some of them have 2 or 3 scenarios, and thousands of data points, because they do mention data for various years. They are on global, regional, country level, and there are also some AI specific. And then on top of that, we looked at 60 large data center operators and their numbers. And then we deployed 3 approaches to develop our own estimate, and I will present them now. Okay, so results. These are the numbers for 2022 in the existing global estimates. And as you can see, there is about a 6-fold difference between the low end here that are around 200 terawatt-hours per year to about 1200 up here. And if you take the very extreme scenarios, then it's even more than this. So quite a spread for the, well, almost present, a little in the past. But then when you go to the future, then we have a 40-fold difference between the low estimates that are still around 200 terawatt-hours per year for 2030 and a very high one that is at 8,000. And this is data centers alone, not all of digitalization. And this is one extreme example, but these down here, some of them, for example, this one, Belkir and El Maligi, goes to 2040, and then it grows actually faster than this one. So by 2040, it's 15% of worldwide GHGs. It's digitalization. So quite a large spread of estimates. And as I said, we went on to do a critical review of these numbers, so not simply presenting them. So we looked at each publication's method and data sources, and we put them on a 6-point scale of quality. Low, medium, high, and very high. For the global ones, none of them we scored as very high. For the regional ones, there are some that are very high. And when a study was not transparent about its methods, then we just said we cannot assess it. And as you see, the studies that we assessed as low, all of them, by the way, use temporal extrapolation approaches, and based usually on this very poor proxy, which is growth in data traffic. And they have a range from about 480 terawatt-hours to 2000 by 2030. Whilst all the others already starting from low, medium, have much lower estimates, and the high ones are in the range of 210 to 440 terawatt-hours with an average of 335. And so this was the global. Then, as said, we looked at the regional estimates. This is now for the US. Of course, the regional estimates focus on the 3 largest data center markets, which are obviously the US, China, and the European Union, or Europe, actually, because it's also UK. And there are many recent studies, by the way, from the over 100 studies that we reviewed. They are over the last decade, so since 2014, and half of them were from January 2024. So, and it was actually quite frustrating because every week the study took longer. We had 2 new sources that we knew, so it sort of became a spinning wheel, and at some point we just said, okay, now it's enough. So these are the numbers for the US. As you see for the current numbers, 2023, we are at it's quite a narrow range, 150 to 200 terawatt-hours per year in the US data center. It's about half of the global market is the US, between 40 and 50%. But then the growth is quite different by, as you see, by 2030. So we have numbers from 300 to 900. For Europe, the spread is not as large. And putting them all together, we have here in the left graph, so the left axis and the bars are the overall consumption, and the right axis is the percentage of that region's electricity consumption. So as you see, of course, North America leads, dominated obviously by the US. This is Asia and Pacific, dominated, of course, by China. And this is Europe, where the European Union has the largest share. And the percentages, as you can see, are quite different. In the US, it's above 3%. In Europe, it's below 2%. China, it's even lower, or Asia more generally. And of course, for specific countries and regions, if we look here, we have Ireland and Singapore, two very known places. Singapore, we're at almost 10%. Ireland at 21% of the national electricity is for data centers. So of course, there are large differences there. And finally, the third method was to look at company data and look at how the large data center operators and technology so data center operators, what are their numbers about their data center consumption. And these are 60 of the largest, are the four big ones from the US: Meta, Microsoft, Alphabet, and Amazon, the largest Chinese one, and so on. So I think we have quite a good overview here. And we distinguish between the company electricity and the data center electricity, because unfortunately, quite often in the reports, it's the company-wide electricity. And of course, they have other operations and not only data center. It depends on the company, right? So the numbers we have is, for example, Apple says that 60. So some companies tell us how much of this is data centers. For Apple, it's 2/3, 67%. Meta is 98%. Salesforce 94%. So we try to use these numbers and sort of use them to generalize from these numbers to the data center specific. And what can be said is that the big four from the US have more than tripled their energy consumption, electricity consumption, from around 35 terawatt hours to over 110 over this 5-year period from 2018 to 2023. And this can be seen worldwide. So for the total hyperscale and colocation market, these numbers are somewhere 220, 285, extrapolating and adding some for enterprise data centers. We arrive at 300 to 380 as our best estimate from these numbers. And bringing these three methods together, the global reviews, the aggregation of sort of regional ones and aggregation of company data, you can see that the overlap, excluding crypto, so this is just traditional data centers in 2023, are somewhere 300 to 380 terawatt hours. And this also corroborates quite nicely with the IEA numbers, which for 1 year later, 2024, are 400 and a bit. So I think there is a good overlap here. These were the numbers. Now, what are the key parameters? Because we looked like, what is the main author? Does it come from industry, academia, NGOs? Is it a peer review article or not? And so on. And what we find is that a modeling approach has by far the biggest impact on the assessed quality and the results. The author affiliation, we were surprised at very limited correlation with the study quality and also with whether impacts are low or high. So some of the very high results come, funny enough, from the industry, with the first author from the industry, which is surprising. There are a lot of studies from consulting firms and investment banks, especially over the last couple of years, since 2022, 2023. They generally lack methodological transparency. And peer review also is not a guarantee for high quality, and not only because, of course, there is predatory journals, but also because there is a lot of, it's a very new domain, and many who are not from the domain have published. So, and they have published in journals and have partly hundreds and over 1,000 citations, but it's we believe it's a very poor quality paper, but it's in a non-profile journal, so also the reviewers probably didn't know really value it correctly. So projections generally are bad and are difficult to make, of course. As we all know, projections are difficult, particularly about the future. And so we ponder a bit about the limits and the necessity of projections. And what we find is that there have been three phases of sort of slightly alarmistic numbers on the impact of ICT or digitalization. And the first one was in the late 90s, early 2000s, when the internet was booming. And then using very simple extrapolations, looking at how the traffic is booming and not considering efficiency gains. This is just an example, an article from Forbes that said, dig more coal because the PCs are coming. And what the article said is still online, by the way, the article, that it is reasonable to project that half of the electric grid will be powering the the internet, basically, within the next decade. So by 2010, we are, of course, very far from that, right? Then the second such wave has been in the late 2010s, when it was again about streaming, but this time video streaming. So it was internet traffic, but especially video streaming. The Guardian, for example, and many journalists have written a tsunami of data. You know, the planet will boil because of video streaming. This was a lot supported by a study that was written in 2019 by a French think tank called the Shift Project, that put out a very well received and widely known study, Lean ICT towards Digital Sobriety, that also has some issues with the methods and the numbers that it put forward. And now we are finally in the third wave, which is AI driven. And the question is it deja vu? Is it, Peter cried wolf the third time? Is it deja vu and actually nothing bad happens? Or is it Peter cried wolf and this time it is for real? And we do believe it is, this time it is certainly more serious. So it is, as Vincent also presented before, there will be a growth, but also the very pessimistic and very alarmistic ones are we believe, wrong again. And coming now to AI, as said, we looked at AI specifically. We looked at the estimates that are out there. So everyone agrees today, as Vincent also said, it's a very low basis. And the spread of growth by 2030 is again similar numbers to the US overall data centers. This is global AI only, between some 200 terawatt hours and around 900 or slightly more. George and I believe we are more in the lower ballpark here, 200 to 400. And if you're interested, we can, in the discussion afterwards, say why. Otherwise, you can see in the study. And finally, we finish with recommendations. I will not go into many details. How to improve the models and estimates. We also have some guidelines for non-experts, how to interpret and critically assess the studies, and also for stakeholders, not only energy modelers and data center operators, how they should share their data and model it, but also for policymakers, regulators, civil society, how to interpret and what sort of criteria to look for. A couple of simple criteria to look for to assess what is it a study of people that know what they're talking about. And again, the previous expertise of authors in the field we find to be very relevant. And I will jump over these details, and I'm happy to take questions in the discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vlad. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to digest there. It's interesting to see how you were navigating through this sea of diversity, from the types of the publications, the types of inputs that they're having, what technical assumptions they're taking into consideration. And it's really good to be able to shine a light through that and try and have some more clarity for the policymakers, but also for industry itself to know particular where to make those investments, where might that growth actually be taking place. And I think the one key takeaway that I will have is be cautious with the cautionary tales, and avoid the Gartner hype cycle, because something will come again in the future which will threaten civilization. But up until that point, what we can try and do is have as best information available and to be to make decisions accordingly. And so with that part of your analysis, Vlad, was looking at the different analysis that was taking place in trying to get these assumptions of electricity consumption. Some of those being the top-down approaches, where we're trying to analyze what data is available, but others are looking at this from a more bottom-up approach of trying to create those models from first principles. And one of those bottom-up models is that which has been produced by the EDNA work stream of the 4ETCP, which is the total energy model. And this is first launched back around 2021, I seem to recall. And now we are seeing the recent release of the fourth generation of the total energy model, which has been looking at the different aspects of electricity consumption driven by digital connected devices, but also of data centers themselves for hosting this digital computational supply. And so with that, I shall now pass the floor to colleague Anson Wu, who will give us an overview on the changes that have taken place in Total Energy Model 4 and what this is going to be covering and how this can be used to provide a bit more clarity for data center energy demand. And so with that, Anson, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Brendan, and thank you for everyone for attending this webinar. As I said, my name's Anson Wu, and I'm presenting the first piece of the Total Energy Model 4.0 for data centers that I developed with Fiona Brocklehurst. The Total Energy Model, which we're going to call TEM4 because it's way too long, is a tool designed to help understand the future energy consumption of data centers and how we can influence it. A lot of what I'm presenting, I guess, will sort of bring together the things that Anson and Vlad has just presented in terms of some of the issues and how we've addressed it in this model and how we can use this model to move forwards. So as a brief outline, the model approach aims to tackle some of these limitations in the existing models that we just heard about. And then we see what happens if we project unconstrained growth to the energy consumption of data centers and compare them with a few selected models forecasts from other authors. And then from this, it leads us to the sort of the most important part, what the TEM model can do in terms of sensitivity analysis to model multiple scenarios to see what happens and how policies can be modeled, which is really the ultimate goal of this work. My presentation is going to be quite short, I think, because Vlad and Anson said everything for me. It's really just trying to put a bit of flesh on how it applies to this model itself. This is their figure, which shows simply just how much the energy consumption varies between models. And as Vlad said, it's very dependent on the approach, the inputs and the assumptions that are being used. And we can really choose any outcome we want based on this. Again, this is an issue for the policymakers. We don't know what the key drivers are. We don't have the certainty of how much could be saved or where we should act. And so what we need is more certainty and the ability to test our assumptions and evaluate the impacts on the energy consumption in the data center. So the way we do this is a bottom-up approach, I would say, but what we focus on is the computational capacity. So these are two key factors that determine the energy consumption. The computational capacity is really the total amount of work that the servers can do, aggregated across all the data centers across the world or whatever region that you're looking at. And as well as that, we have the efficiency of those servers and data centers. So we start here. Those are the two things. We then combine it with a estimate of the utilization, depending on the market segment, which gives us a estimate of the computational energy. We combine that with a factor to account for the extra energy used by storage equipment and networking equipment. And then finally, on top of that, we overlay the energy consumed by the infrastructure, which is indicated by the PUE, to give us a total data center energy estimates. The computational capacity is a proxy, but what we've been able to do is we can ground it on real world and generally reliable data. So these are the CPU server and core sales, and standardized performance testing using CERT, which is widely used in the EU under the Eco Design regulations, and it has to be publicly reported, and the US Energy Star program. For AI servers or accelerated servers, we also use MLPerf, which has a public database of efficiency and performance data. So when we do this, we have the bottom up and we have the accuracy for the current estimates, but also we're able to use a proxy to extrapolate or use other ways to make longer range projections. And finally, to give us a granularity to understand exactly where the energy consumption is occurring and where the efficiencies can be gained, we segment the market into the data center types, the traditional cloud type scales, and the workloads, such as AI and the general compute, which is what has been used in the previous studies as well. So what happens if we assume that the current growth rates continue unconstrained by any real world factors? And in 2024, we get 14,000 terawatt hours, which I think is comfortably above any other projection that we've seen today. All of this virtually is the AI in the hyperscale scenario. It's really important, again, to say that this is an extrapolation and not a forecast. It's hypothetical, and please don't publish this and say that I said that this is what energy is going to do in the future. And you can see when we compare this to other projections, so we've used the Andre projections, Goldman Sachs, in the semi-analysis. So these are more recent projections, forecasts. In 2023, then on the left, the solid blue is a 10, which is one of the lower forecasts, which I'm going to take as a good sign based on what Vlad said previously about the accuracy of the models. But when we go to 2030, we're far exceeding even the highest forecasts from semi-analysis on the far right in light blue. And this isn't because the model is wrong. It's because we put in unrealistic assumptions, and these are the results that we see. But it's a useful starting point to try and understand what's happening and understand the scale of the issue. When we do start to look at the constraints in the real world, we can see other forecasts have tried to apply this using economic data. We see really two sides of it. How many chips can be supplied and how much capital is available to buy those chips and data centers, etc. So on the supply, and then even if those, even if that was unlimited, we then have the power constraints of the data center. How much reliable and cheap enough power is available to run all those servers. And that really brings us to sort of the real strength of our model is that we can easily apply some of these inputs. So what we did was we took some of the assumptions from other forecasts and we put them into our model to see what happens to our base case. Do I have a pointer? I'm just trying to find the pointer. So hopefully everyone can see the pointer. So if we look at from the starting point, our base case in dark blue, which is going along here, this is obviously a very rapid growth that goes completely off the scale. But in fact, if we look at if we apply some of the other assumptions on ICT efficiency, that says that it won't improve, the improvement in efficiency will slow down. We see energy could be slightly higher. Or if we assume that the servers, the AI servers, the lifetime is extended and used for longer periods, resulting in a larger installed base, we also see some increase in energy, even above our quite unrealistic base case. On the other hand, if the efficiency of AI improves faster than expected, and I think Vincent gave some examples of that, such as batching, we can see a reduction in energy consumption along the screen line. And then finally, sort of the biggest impact is when the AI computing capacity doesn't grow as fast as it has in the future, and we could potentially see almost a flatlining of energy consumption. And what we can also do is we can combine all these assumptions. So the red line is a combination of all these single assumptions to give us a new projection, which is far more plausible, more in line with other forecasts, but still represents almost a doubling of energy consumption by 2030 or beyond. I need to switch off the pointer. Okay. So the sensitivity analysis shows us really that there are two highly uncertain factors that are determining the energy consumption of data centers. And that's the capacity growth, just how much hardware will be deployed, will be bought and sold and placed in data centers, and what efficiency gains are available in the hardware and software to mitigate some of that. The other factors, the ICT efficiency and the AI lifetime, they do have a small influence, but it's really dwarfed by the AI capacity. And really, the takeaway from this is that these are the capacity and efficiency in AI are where we should be focusing our data gathering and trying to get more evidence for our modeling scenarios. So this brings us to the real core of the model. What can we do in terms of policy analysis? So the design of the model is such that we can directly change the inputs and ask questions such as what happens if we increase the minimum efficiency of servers through MEP standards or perhaps through labels. And similarly, what we could do for improvements in the infrastructure and the PUE, also perhaps through standards and labels, which the EU is exploring at the moment. We can also look at utilization improvements. Can we influence them and how that will change the energy efficiency going forwards? As well as consolidation and shifting servers and equipment from these traditional data centers, which are running high PUEs and at low utilizations, towards cloud or even hyperscale, and how that could be, and really trying to understand what the energy consumption impacts of these. And the real key to this is because we can quantify some of these energy impacts, we can move towards quite abstract ideas to cost benefit and evidence-based results, which are crucial for going forward with policies. So in summary, The TEM4, its strength is in modeling multiple scenarios as a flexible tool for policy evaluation. It's not a rigid single snapshot of what we think might happen, and means that policymakers can adapt the inputs. They can to represent what they think will happen in the base case, but also how policies will change. The AI growth, if it was to continue as it has now, is simply unsustainable. But we know that there are constraints in reality, and we can understand what that does for energy using this model. The data is obviously rapidly improving. As I said, we're getting new forecasts every day. We're getting new data points every day or every week at least that can be input into the model. And we have the ability to now see what these policy choices on efficiency and quantify them in terms of energy consumption. So really to end, the question is, how do we make this tool available, and how do we start applying it to build more robust evidence-based energy policies for data centers? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anson. So I think there's an underlying theme there of efficiency and how efficiency could help mitigate some of this potential future increases in demand going forward. So again, thank you very much for keeping to the time. You've managed to buy us back a few minutes, which is excellent. So we'll have some time here for the Q&A. So I might go back to our first contributor, back to my IEA colleague, Vincent. You discussed the various scenarios that data center energy demand could be taking to that sky-high rocketing lift-off case where you've got unconstrained growth and capacity, which Anson again was pointing to here as one of the main features, where you got uncontrolled growth and capacity, but also uncontrolled or unconstrained growth and demand. But you then have got some additional scenarios which takes a more, I suppose, conservative approach or almost an optimistic approach. I was wondering if you might be able to elaborate a little more, particularly about the efficiency case, and maybe point to the policy recommendations or the regulatory approach and how that could help mitigate some of these growths, the expansions in demand.
Sure. So indeed, for the efficiency aspect, there is a potential we try to explore. And in the modeling we did, what we assumed is having realistic best practices and efficiency measures, but still very ambitious. And so these three families I've described briefly. So infrastructure, hardware, software, where we saw the biggest direct impact. I'd say the most obvious one, not the biggest, but the most obvious one is on the infrastructure, of course, because if your infrastructure become more efficient, you directly reduce. You see directly the effect without having to convert any service demand, so bit data, let's say, to energy consumption, and then to energy demand. The infrastructure is the thing which is the most obvious and the easier to track, and it's also what has driven the efficiency in the past. So the plateau we had between 2007 and 2015 was driven by a big improvement in infrastructure, not only, but it was a key driver of this efficiency. It was not only the hardware becoming more efficient. And on this aspect on infrastructure, something which is interesting is that today the density of the data center become so high that there is a need for more efficient cooling technologies to deal with this heat, because the heat density of the current rack is also skyrocketing. A few years ago, we were having racks with a power of 4 to 5 kilowatt. Today, we have something around 10 to 12 kilowatts. And if in the coming years, some people are already seeing 70 to 80 kilowatt racks, or even 100 kilowatt racks, which means that the density of the heat produced in these racks cannot be only removed with conventional cooling technologies, but you need to improve the cooling technologies and to retrofit them. And that means that you can also apply these super efficient cooling technologies to more conventional servers. And this is something we can also see. And in the end, having these more efficient cooling technologies can also help to reuse the heat of these racks. And this is also some potential we try to assess in the report, especially in Europe. We saw that 10% of the space heating can be covered by heat reuse. And so 10% is a small contribution, but still a significant contribution. And it would mean that this energy consumed by data center would in the end contribute to the energy system and not be only lost, because actually most of the energy consumed by the data center becomes heat. So if we can reuse this heat, we would have something which helps the energy system. And just quickly on the two other aspects. So hardware is where technology endogenous changes are driving huge improvement. And of the software aspect, it's really this idea of having more transparency on the consumption of some models, for example, for the users, because sometimes there is a bit of lack of transparency on what is the actual energy footprint of the consumption of some model. So this is an aspect, but the best practices, I'd say, is really this idea of having model designed for the task we want them to do, because we saw that there is at least an order of magnitude between the same task achieved by different models. So there is this need to really design the model for the task we want, and not necessarily having general purpose models, which would consume a huge amount of energy for simple tasks. So yeah, I'd say so. And yeah, in general, more communication and dialogue between the stakeholders to improve and implement these best practices is also something I'd say is needed. And the regulatory framework, for example, can try to find a way to incentivize the dialogue or find a way to make it possible.
That's excellent. It does show us that there are options there from the technology side, the software side for innovation, but also the role for policy as well to start looking at the efficiency aspects, particularly on the waste heat reutilization. Because as you mentioned, most of the energy loss is just heat loss, and that has got great potential. So thank you very much, Vincent. So next I'll go to Vlad. And Vlad, within those diverse estimates which we're looking at, there's a lot to navigate there, because not all of these studies are quite comparable, as you've mentioned. But what is also mixed into there, which is quite confusing for some who may not be quite aware of the differences, is why cryptocurrency isn't included in this. Why isn't it all just lumped together? Isn't that just the data center energy demand? Why are we viewing these two separately? I was wondering if we might expand on that. And I'll follow up as well with a second question, which looks at the challenges that you've had in doing this analysis. Is that, yes, there's a lot of numbers out there, but perhaps there's not a lot of transparency. And I was wondering if you might be able to expand on the role of the policymaker for perhaps improving this murkiness, this opaque situation where there's a lot of information, but it's not very clear. Thanks, Vlad.
Yeah, thanks. So starting with the first question, cryptocurrency, and I think George was actually the lead author on this, is on the call as well. So George, please, if you have anything to add, feel free. The crypto is, it is data centers, but it's a very specific for one thing only data center. That's it's very difficult to, like, you need entirely new, you need other methods to model that. It is highly dependent on the price of cryptocurrencies. So it can be today, if Bitcoin falls by half tomorrow, the price, or doubles its price, then the energy consumption will roughly follow this. So it's only dependent very little on the price of electricity, almost negligible, and on very little other factors. I wrote a different study on this, and so it is very difficult to foresee the energy consumption, as I find it very difficult to foresee the sort of the demand for it, basically the price of cryptocurrencies, or if they will switch from as Ethereum did, right, from proof of work to proof of stake or some other, then it again will fall by like 3 orders of magnitude. So it's really the proof of work that is the problem, and the price of the cryptocurrencies. So it provides a very specific, very narrow service that is difficult to predict. This was the main reason why we felt we take it out.
Excellent.
And the second question was on
Is from the outset, you've mentioned about the diversity in content out there, and perhaps the quality was not the same across all of the pieces of analysis that you looked at. And one of the reasons that there is such a diversity of estimates out there is because there's not a lot of publicly available data on data center demand. And I'm just wondering then, if you see from the IEA's perspective, is what is our role? How could we advise policymakers to improve this situation?
George, would you like to take that, and I can share the slide
Sure.
on our recommendations?
Yeah, thanks, Vlad. Thanks, Brendan. I think on that, yeah, I mean, we would like more data. So, for countries to be collecting energy consumption data from companies at the country level. So it's really good to see, or meter data, as we're seeing in Ireland. So those, in our experience, has provided good proof points of like measured data. Obviously, the largest hyperscalers are publishing data, some better than others. So some are just publishing kind of company-wide electricity, as Vlad showed. But hidden in that could be, for Amazon, for example, their Whole Foods, their warehouses, their data centers. So it's hard to understand and really get a precise value. So there are best practices from the companies to disclose more data, ideally at the site level. So there are companies that do that, sharing PUE data in different geographies. All of these provide really good triangulation points. And that was really the focus of our study, trying to bring together these different perspectives. How do they converge? Where are the biggest uncertainties? And it was quite interesting to find that, yeah, the numbers do kind of center in the range that we published. But yeah, I think certainly policymakers, data agencies at the national level could do much more. Because I think at the company level, we do have data from the biggest companies, but there's a very long tail of data centers. And in that area, I think data collection efforts for commercial buildings where there might be enterprise data centers would also be very, very helpful. Yeah, thanks.
That's fantastic. And just before I move off from Vlad and George, I have a question coming in, which discusses the limitations of some of the peer-reviewed publications that were studied as part of this analysis. And the question is, if you were to publish this study elsewhere to try and improve the amount of information out there, where exactly would you look to publish this to make this much more available to have a greater impact?
I think given that I would like nice publications, but also that it is a domain of recent public interest. I think a relatively wide journal would be quite fitting, something like Nature Energy, for example, or Nature Sustainability. So one in that, and also because some of the poorer methodologies, like there is one example of one of them. those numbers have been taken over by a Nature opinion piece. It was not an article in Nature, but a journalist who wrote, a staff journalist of Nature who wrote about those numbers, and that made them hugely popular. So of course, that sort of platform would of course be very welcome. So yeah, that's what I think would be the most fitting, but obviously it's also very difficult to publish there.
Thank you very much. So I think I'll move to Anson now, and but also allowing some time for Vlad and George to come into this as well. And Vincent, I know you need to run off for a session now, so thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
One of the questions that we've had in is about regional diversity. We're looking at these on global numbers, but is the picture the same everywhere? Are all regions growing at the same rate? Are we seeing data centers popping up everywhere? So I'll pose it to Anson, but to the other colleagues, please feel free to join in.
Yep, I think this very much comes down to sort of the economics of the data centers and the amount of investment going into them. We know, and it's clear to see that the US and China are investing a lot into data centers and AI, and Europe is perhaps playing catch up in this respect. But we also see articles from the Middle East about trying to develop sovereign AI, and sovereign AI is something that most countries are looking into as a strategic capability. So the answer is we do see that there are big differences, but it's very hard to know what those differences are given the amount of data, and there's perhaps geopolitics involved in it, which isn't really my domain to start trying to dig into.
Thanks, Anson. So unless we've got any other responses to that question? No? George, please.
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, even within the US, you can see developments. I mean, the IEA AI Observatory is very helpful in showing within different states what kind of developments we're seeing. So there's kind of, regional level, obviously the US growing very quickly, China, but then within, countries and even like within states, the growth being quite different, and obviously that bringing different grid challenges. So would recommend people read the IEA report, which focuses on the supply challenges as well on the electricity side. And we see this in Europe as well, with Ireland, with the Netherlands and others, where it's higher than the average across the region, and in Asia as well. I think Southeast Asia is an interesting growth area as well, in Malaysia in particular. But yeah, we just need more data at the country level and even the state level to get a better grasp on where the growth is heading.
Thank you very much, George. So with that, we're just a few minutes over, but I think we did very well, all considering challenges from power cuts as well. At the start, we had a quote from our executive director, Fatih Birol, there is no AI without energy. But it turns out we can still run a webinar without electricity. So we're doing quite well. So thank you to the previous engineers who installed the backup generators. Just to round up, I think from where we are at the start of this, we can see there has been a lot of uncertainty in the different trajectories that we could be going. Some estimates have said that data center electricity demand will just continue on a very slow, moderate growth. Others will say it'll grow so fast we need to build a new nuclear power station every day. And I think the reality is somewhere in the middle, probably closer to the bottom of those estimates. But one of the overarching themes that has emerged from the discussions today is the role of efficiency and how advances in efficiency could help mitigate some of those demand increases. We can see that in the last decade or so, the amount of data traffic globally has increased more than 25-fold, whilst the total demand for electricity has maintained at a slow, moderate growth at around 1 to 1.5% of total annual electricity consumption. Now, it looks likely that will change in the coming years, but how that will change is up to the technology companies, but also of the policymakers to make sure that data centers are integrating into the economy as best as they can, but also where possible by using some of that waste heat. So by looking at the role then of efficiency in data centers, that sets me up nicely for the next and final session in this series of joint webinars between the IEA's TREDEN initiative and the 4ETCP, which brings in the eDNA workstream as well as SEAD. And that will now be happening on the 23rd of July. So the event page will be up very shortly. So please look out for that and register. And on that day, we'll be looking at the efficiency of data center architecture, looking back historically and discussing where this may be going in the coming years. So without further ado, I'll draw to a close. And again, thank you very much to all our contributors today, from Vincent, from Vlad, Anson, George and Fiona sitting there in the background, and earlier on from the 4E program manager, Kevin Lane. And with that, I'll draw to a close and thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you all again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.